Bueno, hola de nuevo. ¿Cómo estáis? We go now to the last roundtable of this evening in Enlighted 2022. It's going to be a roundtable reflecting the future of learning from the PDF to the metaverse. It's a really interesting topic. And with us, we have Daniel Hernández, Vice President, Devices Consumer de Telefónica, José Esteves, Professor on Information System and Co-Director of the Metaverse Center at IE University. And I think that we can connect online with Courtney Harding, international expert on immersive learning and education in the metaverse and member of the Metaverse Council at the World Economic Forum. And this panel, this roundtable, is going to be moderated by Geoffrey Gerard, Director General de la Fundación IE. Un aplauso para ellos y tienen la palabra.
Nada. Sí, sí. Okay. Well, put your glass on and let's hit the last panel of the day on the metaverse. So, pleasure to be with you. I'm Geoffroy Gérard. I'm the General Director of the IE Foundation, one of the organizers at IE University of the Enlighted. And actually, you were not expecting me to be moderating this panel because it was one of our colleagues, Stella Campos, journalist from Valor, but circumstances happened and the poor Stella was not able to join us for a personal reason. And then I'm jumping. And the good thing is that I have no idea about the metaverse. So I think that, all the audience will have more than me. And so if we have, I will make sure that I give you the floor also and we can ask, no? It's the last talk of the day, but it's actually probably one of the most inspiring, one of the most intriguing. What is this going to happen? What have we in front? What is that word of metaverse? What is immersive learning? This panel, the future of learning, from the PDF to the metaverse, and actually starts with an interesting, I think, first point, that it's true. Education has been around since the academia, we could say since Plato. Universities have evolved around years and years, no? We have even in Spain some universities of more than 100 years, but the way of teaching, the way of the exchange between the students and the professor and all the relations in the classroom hasn't changed that much until 3 years ago. A total disruption, a pandemic that made us transform, that maybe made us face some realities that we were not ready for in the sector, or some clashes, some experience, some Zoom effects, as some said. So now we're just jumping into something completely different. We like even not jumping in I would say, an exchange between two, even if it's online or if it's presence and face-to-face, but actually immerse ourselves in a virtual world where it can take benefit. So actually, as I have no idea about the metaverse, my first question, and I'm really happy to see Courtney here too, and on my back at the turn, but great to have you from New York. So great to have Courtney. So Courtney is actually advising many companies worldwide, one of them Meta, and she's working hardly on education and impact through the metaverse. And she's member of the Metaverse Council in the World Economic Forum and different places. Jose, I would say, is a representative of the academia that I was mentioning before, as a professor of information system at IE and a vice dean of the School of Science and Technology. And actually, we have our technologist, Daniel here, Hernandez, who's actually driving the metaverse at Telefónica together with Isai Rubio as a chief metaverse officer and himself as a vice president for devices and a consumer IoT. So,
very well.
So I think that's great because we have, I would say, an immersed in the metaverse, Courtney. We have the industry and we have the academia, so we find. Courtney, I wanted to ask you, and actually I'm going to ask you that same question for an ignorant in the beginning of this panel, is what is the metaverse and why is it important for education?
So I always like to make a joke. Oh wow, I'm echoing. It's on my end, or can you hear my echo too?
No, we hear you well.
Okay, fantastic. Let's throw it then. So metaverse, right? And this is where I make a point about the metaverse, like screens. It's all. But what I really mean by that is it's an opportunity for people to connect in a way that the current generation of the internet does not allow us to do. So in the metaverse, you embody an avatar, you voice and gesture connect, and it's immersive and it's very different than what we have now, which are mediated screens, and I have crazy echo on my end. And it's just not the best experience, right? It's an experience we have to deal with because of COVID. I'm not unfortunately, because I have a COVID test, flu. But I think really education, what it does is it allows us to connect in this much more immersive and enriching way than we've been able to previously. Zoom school is terrible for students. We've seen tons of data around that. But we've seen a lot of data about learning universe, including how much higher scores are and how much more engaged students are.
That's great.
So maybe I can add, no?
Yeah, sure. No, add, yeah.
So sometimes when I talk to my friends and they ask me the same questions, what's the meta what? What is this? And by the way, this is not probably the right time to talk about metaverse with all the things that are happening in the industry, right? Just with people being fired and negative comments and so on, right? But I tend to explain to my friends what metaverse is by explaining what it is not, right? And that helps to shape a little bit the idea. So metaverse is not Fortnite, right? However, Fortnite will be an element of it, right? Metaverse is not everybody wearing glasses and lying on the sofa like those dystopian images and movies and things like that, right? There might be people who do this, right? But that's not the case. A metaverse is not crypto coins and so on. Of course, Web3, blockchain, crypto will be technology components and enablers of this construction of the metaverse, right? A metaverse is not science fiction of the next 30 years. It's actually happening as we speak. So metaverse, the definition is the next evolution of the internet. Today, internet is not Facebook. It is broader than that, right? So if you make the analogy, so metaverse is actually how the internet is going to evolve thanks to a lot of technological improvements and advancements. Some of them are related to the ability to mix 3D objects in the real world, or the ability to sort of develop immersive experience that take you to the Middle Age or to the ancient Greek to meet Platon, right? So how we do everything we do today in the internet in the next phase of the internet is what we call metaverse. Is the convergence of the real world, physical world, data, and the virtual world. It's a little bit of a complex topic, but hopefully.
Great. As an academic, as a hacker, has many of your facets. Jose, how do you envision actually the role that the metaverse has, or the potential of immersive learning into education?
Well, I think, Paul, we can start what has happened with digitalization for some years. As both of you mentioned, and you see yourselves, most of us will have a bunch of screens. But actually, here, we have two screens, another screen, and so on. But there's a physical separation between the human being and the technology. You do that with your mobile phone. We have the laptop, and then you have the TV, and so sometimes we have like 3 screens at the same time. Actually, we call that we are in the multi-screen era, because we have a bunch of screens. But there's still human beings, and then we have all the screens where we interact. But there's no kind of natural interaction, as both Danielle and Corinne mentioned. It's like the idea of the metaverse and immersive learning is that we really experience living those things, like an avatar, an object, etc. So that's what's going to change in education. In education right now, for example, we still have the students perceive that as very artificial, everything that we talk. Or you need to use your imagination, especially for experimentation, simulations. When you talk about, for example, I see that in operations. When you talk about a factory, so we put nice videos, we go to YouTube, professors do use a lot of videos, but we go to YouTube and students see a factory and how works digital twins, but they don't live it. With the new technologies is you can live that experience, but not through a screen. You are going to see that you being part of that scenario. And there's an also perspective on the approach of learning, which we call affective learning. Affective learning is a new way of how you feel the way you are learning and how you are going to internalize that experience from the emotions and the feelings and behaviors. So immersive learning is going to bring that affective learning that right now we cannot do it.
Yeah, no. I would say that it's like teaching, learning, and retaining. And the retaining part is something. I wanted to ask you, Courtney, actually, you deal with universities, with companies, into actually, I would say, embracing, engaging into a active and participative methodologies through the metaverse and in project with impact too. How do you see that relation? Because one of the feelings that often when you talk within the sector, I think we kind of privilege here. We have a fantastic tech company as Telefonica, with an innovative university such as IE. Well, I'm not going to say about Meta and about all the technologies that you're driving out there. So I would say somehow we're quite privileged, no? And all the education system is not the same. And actually, we faced, no, in times of COVID, for example, well, the fact that, the adaptation to technology was not the same, the pace was not the same for someone or another. It was complicated for professors, etc. So how do you feel that relation of the two, I would say, two speed? Now we have a sector as education that maybe has taken a long time to evolve and now is in a really interesting disruption, but really from the years ahead, the last years, and in the other side, we have a tech world that is actually changing, transforming at a super speed every day. So how do you connect those two, and what is the relation that you see now with a bit bridging, I would say, education and the technology?
So I fell back on one of your original points, which is, I was in a meeting with a big company, like a corporate, and the founder, the head of learning I was meeting with, was like obsessed with the logistics of distributing headsets. She was like, knock it out this point, like, well, how do we shut the headsets out? How do we manage them? They're, answering all the questions, making more and more frustrated because you these are all solvable problems. Let them go. And finally, I kind of snapped and I said, look, every single public school in the United States of America and many around the world said we could never do distance learning. We could never do remote education. It just never happened. They figured it out in like 2 to 3 weeks during COVID. Right? During the middle of a global pandemic, was going off rails. Every single public school figured out this learning. Did they do a good job at it? Debatable. Some better than others, right? But the point is, technology is available. It's adaptable. Certainly, we do need to ensure that it is equitably distributed and managed, right? There are lots of programs that. There are lots of programs where both headset and desktop or on mobile that are fantastic for sort of optimizing learning. So, the only thing that really keeps them going widespread is I think some budget, sure, but I think a lot of it is just fear of change, fear of experimentation, fear of learning. And it's funny, right when I was getting ready, I just happened to look at Twitter, I'm sure that it is, it's sometimes fun to look at. And somebody posted today's 28th anniversary of Geosys. Now we talk about apples in the metaverse, the headsets are big and funky. Fair. But guess what? Any webpage you look at today doesn't look like what a Geosys page looked like 28 years ago. Right? This stuff evolves, changes, move, processes, build. So people sort of say the metaverse is that, the metaverse is actually, it's a very short sighted and academic professors and teachers are interested in it. Like to just sort of miss it out, right? Right, this thing is I think silly and short-sighted. And also is this. You know, somebody earlier referred to Fortnite. That's where kids are. Fortnite, they're on Roblox, they're already in a version of metaverse. Now these kids are used to learning that way. They will eventually learn the workforce and be used to working that way. Companies and educational institutions don't adapt. Will find themselves at a disadvantage. So it's really incumbent on educational institutions to start learning about this and investing in it now, so that they are not on the back foot in a few years when this is mainstream.
That's great. And actually, I wanted to ask you, Daniel, because so at Telefonica, you've been immersed in many events lately, the Metaverse Day that you really finished in the end of September and different happening. So when we think, and for all of us, when you talk about Web3, when we talk about those immersive technologies and how they can help our daily life, maybe not only in education, but also, I would say, on the future of work and everything, what are actually, you think like that the next happenings, like what are we going to be able to use the sooner the better? Because I know that we're in evolution, probably, we're reinventing even the metaverse or the immersive technologies day to day. But what do you think the most practical ones that could be implemented and how?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a couple of use cases to distinguish, but as I said, I mean, this is an alignment of planets, right? In terms of what the different technology components need to be on track to enable some of those use cases, right? There's a difference between virtual reality and augmented reality. I don't know if you're familiar with these terms. Maybe quickly, virtual is transporting you to a different place. Augmented reality is seeing what the real life is, but having digital objects that augment the experience and you can interact with them, right? So you're today here with augmented reality, but we would be having VR glasses to take you to somewhere else, right? So that's just to distinguish. So if you apply those two technologies to education, obviously there are multiple millions of use cases that if you apply virtual reality to learning, I can take you to history, to the French Revolution. For example, I've got two kids. My youngest one had 2 exams on Monday and Tuesday. So I was teaching him during the weekend. All the school, making notes and, so I'm a very old school at home. Not here in the office, but at home it's kind of old school. And obviously, he had an exam in history about the 19th century in Spain and so on. So I was telling him about the French Revolution and so on. It would have been great that he would have, content and a VR glasses that he would be there to learn about what happened in that moment of history, and it's almost like a movie, and there are plenty of studies that show that when someone is leaving those moments, retention increases dramatically, right? So it's how effective the content and the technology is to achieve that objective of academy. Then he had a math exam. And thank goodness that we had a YouTube video with a teacher, right? But imagine that the teacher could be a hologram, and then he would have AR glasses. His teacher would have recorded himself repeating what he had, how he had explained that problem in class. So he would have the opportunity to repeat offline, the same lesson as a hologram, in his living room and these kind of things. That technology is still not there yet, but we're already working on holographic and VR type of education anyway. So there is a lot of case studies and there is a lot of use cases that are happening. And as the technology evolves, you will be able to provide those kind of enhanced experiences, right? Another, and just final example, we are working with a startup here in Telefónica for B2B customer for health and safety, right? So whether you are extinguishing a fire or you're reanimating somebody, so to replicate that in real life, you need to put a real life fire, but you're going to get burned, right? So we have content in virtual environments that allow you to train how to use a fire extinguisher, the types of fire extinguishers, the fact that you have to zigzag to put the fire off, and things like that. Things that you would normally not be able to do with real life objects, but thanks to a virtual environment and a 3D environment, you can do it safely, right? So I think there's a lot of possibilities thanks to the new technologies.
That's really interesting. And I actually remember one of our professors at IE some weeks ago telling me about an experience with students in communication classes using immersive to be and put themselves in the skin of a black person in the US in the 60s and live actually discrimination and see how it was effective, etc. No, and being able actually being immersed in those experiences, and that I find as a father and I think as someone in education fascinating. No, maybe it can be connected with the retention and the way that actually when you put it into practice. No, I wanted to ask you actually, Jose, because when we think about the metaverse and we're thinking here about new technologies, immersive technology, normally it is for early adopters, no? And we face that in education. I think if we think about blended and virtual education years ago, no? And IE was a pioneer in its case for starting online MBAs more than 25 years ago and training professors and everything, no? But it has a cost and it takes time and you need to transform your educators and sometimes academics. And I'm sorry, you an academic. You know, I wouldn't say are dinosaurs or are they complicated to transform or they're resistant to change, but they haven't been trained. So how can we self-pace? And maybe Courtney, you can also join on that. It's like how we go from early adopters to actually maybe a mainstream use of those immersive technology into education, no? Especially in public schools, in K-12 or in other...
I think it's absolutely different we're living now, where we have like 10 years ago when we started, or 15 years ago, I started teaching MBAs in the blended and virtual world and so on. But that was just a channel. Now we're living is, first of all, we have generations that come to our classes and they already use virtual reality, for example. So I go to my classes, most of my students, they already have the Oculus for entertainment. What we need more is we have a generation that knows a bit more for certain areas. So we need to be careful with generation we're talking about. The very seniors is, wow, what is this? The very young guys are going to tell you, no, I already tried it at home, and these kind of things. So they want to see different perspectives. So there's a generation gap here on the technology that we need to see. And there's a second aspect. The metaverse is more than just the technology. And actually the criticism I'm doing to the metaverse vendors, providers, and so on, is we are lacking from an educational perspective of content on use cases. Let me give you an example. At IE, for example, it's very successful when we use for soft skills. For example, students love to do job interviews preparation using metaverse. That works so well. Because it works so well is not only because students can try many times and they feel safe because, say, I'm talking with a machine, I can do all my mistakes, no one is going to tell me, so I like these kind of things. Negotiation, the social part, they love it, for example, to apply that on the metaverse. For example, now we have a new case, we are developing content, as you know, for sustainability, climate change. So these kind of things. But for example, a few months ago, we tried Minecraft. Okay, as you know, these famous games and so on. Our students told us, we are not kids, don't put us in a room with Minecraft. And I know some companies love it, they don't like it. Adults don't like this. Another perspective is what we can do that people really feel there's value on doing that. For example, putting the students in a metaverse classroom, students don't like it. They say, okay, it's cool for 10 minutes. After 10 that, and say, listen, what is the advantage? I'm here with the glasses, which are so hard to maintain. There are some health issues in terms of this. So just doing that is not enough. We really need to come up with very good content and the value. If you do that, I think we are going to have the adoption. Just by buying the glasses, and I know Meta has a lot of data about that, most of the people after 2-3 times, they start not using them if it's not for entertainment, gaming, and so on, which is the very successful. So probably we need to leverage on some industries who have been very successful, the Fortnites and so on, to see what these guys have done very well to engage people.
What will you add, Courtney, maybe on that?
Yeah, so a couple things. I think the first is, into mainstream use. There's an amazing company called 3XR. They're based in the US. I've worked a lot. And they have deep partnership with Meta and other tech companies. So they build twins of university campuses and allow professors to teach in that environment. The schools that are adopting it are not the traditional Stanford or Harvard or MITs. It is community colleges. It is what's called land-grant state universities. So schools in the U.S. that were founded on the principles of teaching students like agriculture. Obviously now they're more mainstream universities. And then you have like public schools. You have schools that serve mostly underserved communities like American students or Latinx students. And it's amazing to see that there are schools that have jumped on this. So I have a meeting with South Dakota State University, right? If you're familiar with the United States of America, you know that South Dakota is one of the fullest states by population. It's very rural. It's middle of the country. If any of you have ever heard of yes, not South Dakota. Most people in America, right? It's not tech. They are so excited about technology. They are all to meet with us, with myself and some folks that I'm working with about how they can have every incoming first years next year using headsets. So it's a little bit of a myth. This is something that is kind of stuck in this higher echelon, right? I will absolutely agree it needs more content. That is something a lot of folks are working on. It needs funded more. Absolutely, we need so much more content. But again, to go back to my example, I'm really excited about it. The original internet wasn't as much. There was some stuff, right? There's an amazing TV show called *Halt and Catch Fire*. And Netflix about the internet. It's one of the best TV shows ever made. I would encourage you to watch it. And one sort of plot point to the series is it's starting up basically a competitor, and they hire a team to catalog every website that exists on the internet. And they can hire 20 people, the early 90s, will just catalog everything. So again, keep in mind that we are very early. More content will be built and need to be built. But depending on what you're trying to do, there is content out there. So you can start teaching, and you can start building your own, and you can start build your own, and especially just using like metaverse platforms like XR, Engage, like but I won't. Those are all DIY. You can just create a room and hold your lecture there, right? So I think educating on the use cases and how they can best fit right now and get started, and then the more demand that we see, the more stuff will get built because that's sort of one necessarily.
Well, thank you. Actually, so we've talked about the possibilities it gives us now. But I wanted to address something different, which is the cost. We all have faced also now into, I would say, our children's and the experience of the youth of today, of those being immersed in everything. We were talking about Fortnite before, we can talking about gaming, we can talking about, and the lack sometimes of attention and sometimes in retention afterwards, in the classroom, due to screens, so how can we face or what is seen in the sector, I would say, both in the industry, in the academia, and how you can envision that looking on the point of view, for example, of Meta, Courtney, is like, how are we addressing the issues that would be linked to mental health, that could be linked with the costs that being isolated, like I tried myself, I'm a bit lying at the beginning, I've tried myself some experience in the metaverse some months ago, and actually I can recognize, like after 7 minutes, I was completely dizzy, you know, and even like physically, and the interference with those use of technologies, no? So I mean, okay, we're great, we all agree that it has a huge potential, but what do we need to be worried about, and what should we take care in building that to be sure that we manage well so our kids in the classroom, the students, the professor in their use and everything can make the most of the technology, but also leveraging the risks. I don't know.
Can I jump? So, because you're touching a couple of things, but I like. So I agree with Jose because content is king here, right? So especially in education. So unless you have exciting content, you're not able to enjoy and have a proper education. The good news is that it's all about gamification, and you know the grandparents of the metaverse is the gaming industry, and you're developing interactive experiences like a game, and game is key for education, right? And you know that because there are a lot of websites, you know, that teach different things by playing games to the kids, and or by, you know, you improve retention and things like that. Okay, great. But to enter the metaverse type of experience, the entry ticket is always a device. Of course, you can. We were arguing outside that a smartphone is an access to web AR experiences, like a Pokemon Go type of thing, right? So, and everybody has a smartphone these days. But I'm talking about the more advanced use cases, like immersive, you know, going to the Louvre Museum, right? So I'm very proud because some of my guys had a brilliant idea many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when Google had a service called Daydream that allowed you to sort of, they had recording in 360 museums, and you know, and with cardboard glasses that costed $10 each. You know, you could build it yourself. You know, you could have you know, an immersive experience of as you were in there, and you can navigate and things like that. And we did a volunteering initiative to visit some hospitals, kids with cancer, and you know, this, and take them there, right? And you could see their faces and so on, right? So cost is a component, but this and we are on a journey to improve cost. But at the same time, the experience need to improve. So you cannot make it as cheap as a cardboard, $10, because it's true. After a few minutes, 15 minutes of usage, I mean, you would get dizzy because the experience was not there. With today's technology, that's getting better, but that is increasing the cost of the product, right? Because you need more sensors, more cameras, 6DoF technology, and these kind of things. And there is a journey to bring it back and democratize the price back to an entry level so that it's mass market, right? So you have to balance between the right user experience and the improvements that you need to build into those products that at the same time make it a little bit more expensive, right? And then you're also touching on another complete separate field about the risks, mental health, cybersecurity, and so on, right? As I said, metaverse is the next evolution of the internet. So the internet problems are moving into the metaverse and probably growing exponentially in some cases, because we're no longer talking about a person behind a screen, but an avatar inside, you know, that moves and things like that. So there is going to be a new field of problems related to the ones that are today in the internet, right? But there are initiatives that we're doing in the industry to create, you know, we just launched, my friend Yaitha and Richard Benjamin wrote a white paper to talk about these kind of issues and so on. So this is a concern that we're trying to address from the beginning of the construction of the metaverse.
And actually from the builder, Courtney, or would you say, like, what is your feeling about that? Is it an issue that is addressed? Because sometimes one of the questions is, you know, we sometimes feel the consequences of of those technology and the risk in it while the thing is already implemented, and then we try to actually avoid them to happen. So always a thought on your side to actually take those risks. And by the way, we have 6 minutes left, so what I will do is also tell our audience here to think about some question if you want to ask, and if you want to ask the microphone, because the next is on you, okay?
All right. Well, I'll be quick with this because I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions. So remember when I said let's start the metaverse is people, right? People are complicated. People are going to be terrible to each other in real life. I live in New York City every day. They're going to be terrible to each other on the internet. That's a surprise. And people will be terrible to each other in the metaverse because at a certain level that is COVID. Now, there are lots of things you can do from sort of a management perspective, and governance perspective, in terms of building in guardrails, building in reporting procedures that make the metaverse, I think, safe. The other thing I will say is we now have a body of knowledge about what not to do, right? I'm watching implode in real time, and it's fascinating to watch because it's a car crash, and also, it could have been prevented, and we can learn from it, right? We can learn the fact that people did not think through the potential impacts of their technologies. So Jack Dorsey, way back in the day, thought it would be fun to start this little thing where he could post where he was, I'm eating a burrito in Golden Gate Park or something, and share it with some friends and share it with the world on Twitter, and that was like a fun idea. But he didn't think through the long-term ramifications. They were very late to the game in terms of controlling the platform and how it worked. And one thing I will say as well is the demographics of who built the second iteration of the internet. Everyone looks very similar, right? It's men, they're white, Ivy League or Stanford, Bay Area. It's pretty homogenous group. So one thing that I'm working on very hard is to make sure that the metaverse is Web3, whatever you want to call it, is built by a really people, and that's not to exclude anyone, right? Everyone can be involved. We need to make sure that everyone is involved, everyone is represented, everyone's sharing their voices, because now we know what we can envision a future that's much more positive and healthy, happy, and built by and for everyone, not just for the few.
Okay, so opening the floor. Do we have anyone for a question? Like, we have a microphone, so we can make sure you record it too.
This is going to be a little bit of a dummy question. You talked about virtual reality, but there's a difference between virtual reality and metaverse, at least the perception of permanency, in the sense that a little bit like some of these get Minecraft, right? Where you're living in that world. In fact, you go to bed, you come back, and you've been killed, right? And so the metaverse, does it have this permanency in the sense I will inhabit it and come back to it and continue to build on that reality over time? Because virtual reality, I go in and I go out and I had an experience. It's kind of delimited in time. Whereas the metaverse, I understand it to be over time, or no?
Well, actually, if we go to the concept of Meta, Facebook, that they did, and we are now talking as you know, the metaverse concept comes from a book called Snow Crash. And the idea is that it's like the Marvel movies, that you have different virtual spaces, and you, with an avatar, you can navigate through different spaces with your own avatar. So there's a question of interoperability. So the idea, as you say, is you don't leave the experience, it's done. In the metaverse, the concept that you continue in there and use, as Cornelia mentioned before, the avatars, this concept that they don't exist yet, but that you could go with your same virtual identity, go through different virtual spaces, and it's up to you to maintain or not the same identity, but you can maintain that kind of permanency that you're saying. So it's a kind of, forget metaverse, call the multiverse, like the superheroes that navigate through different worlds and so on, they keep it. So that is what we try to build on the metaverse from a conceptual perspective. The virtual reality, as Daniel explained, or augmented reality or mixed reality that now Apple is talking, is more a concept of some blocks of some kind, as you say, time limit experiences. But the metaverse is something more long-term as individuals.
And not to confuse metaverse with a virtual world, right? Like Horizon or like Fortnite or Roblox or whatever, right? Where in some of those virtual worlds, you are able to have your house, you know, your clothes, you know, everything, and that will be persistent, right? So they will be there when you come back and things like that, right? Like a game. And that's a virtual world where you will be able to interact and socialize with other people. There are other, so metaverse is broader than that. So, my definition of metaverse is not the Horizon or the Fortnite of this world. So I'll give you another example just to illustrate what you asked. If I am, so digital art and the creator economy is expected to be heavily disrupted thanks to these technological improvements, and it's not education, right? So if an artist, I might decide to create a digital graffiti here in this world, and I will publish it to everybody to watch it. So if somebody puts on glasses, can see my art, right? And it will be there as long as I decide it is there, right? Through the technology. So there will be persistent digital objects in the augmented world as well, right? So that's another example of your question.
Good. We maybe want to take, yes, one last question.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. First one is, what is the role of the teachers in a metaverse experience? And the second one is there any space for the educational publishers in the metaverse experience, taking in account that you have stated that the metaverse should be a time limit experience? So there is no space for one education year with multiverse experiences in a primary or
Courtney,
secondary.
did you get that one? Because I think you may
There's
be...
more, yeah, the second.
Yeah, I can speak to both of those. So I'll answer your second question first, I'll go backwards. So with regards to the metaverse being like a time-limited experience, that just means that it's best practice to give people breaks when they use the headset, right? So it's very difficult for 8 hours at a time in the headset. I've done multi-hour headset experiences, and it's not the best. So certainly integrating other things into the lesson plans is very important. For educational publishers, there is a huge opportunity to be creating content in the metaverse, partnering with different metaverse creators who all of the substantial body of knowledge they have into metaverse-ready lessons. So huge opportunity there to be done. In terms of teachers, there are all these different platforms teachers can use to build content, right? So teachers can be building. Teachers can be, using 360 cameras. They can be teaching classes in different platforms. They can be experimenting. They can be growing. They can be sharing colleagues. So I think really incumbent on those of us who are creating a metaverse to work very closely with educators to make sure that this is the type of content that gets made and that everyone's behind this moving forward.
Well, thank you. And actually, they tell me the time is up, but I just wanted to tell you also, I think that when we talk about early adopters and we talk about to take the pace and learn every day, one of the things that I'm going to do after this panel is follow those three, and I'm sure that either in their social media, in the LinkedIn, in other platforms, make sure that I cope with all you share. Courtney, Jose, Daniel, thank you very much. And as we started saying that, okay, university, or I would say classroom, was started in the academia by Platon. When I was at the university, I remember using those plastic and light projector to learn on our classes, and it was only 25 years ago. And now actually universities have campuses in the metaverse. So actually the only thing I would say to finish this panel is see you to the next edition of Enlightened in the Metaverse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Bueno, y hasta aquí llega nuestro primer día del Lighted 2022. Ha sido una jornada, la verdad, cargada de interesantísimas reflexiones. Esta última ponencia ha sido muy, muy interesante, de verdad. Hemos aprendido mucho sobre oportunidades, sobre inclusión y sobre el futuro del aprendizaje, que en muchos casos, pues ya lo estamos viendo, es más que el presente del aprendizaje. Nada, os recordamos que mañana seguiremos con la segunda jornada del Lighted 2022. Muchas gracias a todos por asistir y mañana seguimos. Nos vemos. Hasta